Welcome back. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going on a deep dive into some writings that are jam-packed with unconventional ideas. And our mission is to brainstorm potential new avenues for the author, kind of like we're peeking into the writer's notebook and helping shape future works.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, these texts are kind of a blend of philosophy, psychoanalysis, and pop culture. They take some pretty dense theories and apply them to everything, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer to the nature of reality
It's
itself.
a pretty wide range. So the author's been doing some serious thinking here. One thing that really stood out to me was the concept of masculine and feminine logic. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, this isn't about biological differences. It's more about two different ways of thinking about logical implication.
Yeah, it kind of challenges the whole traditional if A, then B thing. Instead, it presents an alternative that looks at possibilities and exclusions. The author argues that what they call feminine logic is less about finding a single truth and more about navigating all these different potential outcomes, like a web.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So how could the author push this concept further? Really develop it? What if they looked at how this feminine logic could apply to problem solving in fields like politics or economics?
That's a great point. Instead of searching for one right answer, we could look at multiple solutions all working together.
Exactly. It could lead to some totally new approaches to these really complex problems. And it kind of ties into another big idea that keeps popping up, the idea of unauthorized bodies.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
This concept dives into how things become acceptable or not, even in fictional worlds. The author uses mutants in The Gifted as an example.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Their powers are often seen as dangerous, so they're unauthorized in society.
Right.
But then there's that beautiful scene where two mutants use their powers to create an aurora borealis, remember?
Oh, yeah, beautiful imagery.
It's a powerful image of authorized power because it's beautiful, not destructive. It completely changes the perception.
Totally.
So what if the author takes this unauthorized concept into the real world? Think about social movements, technologies, even art that challenges the status quo. Are they like unauthorized bodies pushing to be recognized?
Ooh, I like that. Imagine a whole book exploring that, how authorization plays out in the fight for social justice or AI development. I would read that book.
Me too. And speaking of deep dives, the author goes pretty deep into psychoanalysis too. They apply Lacan's four discourses, these structures of knowledge, power, and desire, to something as simple as making tea.
Sounds a little strange, I know, but it actually makes sense when you see how they break it down.
Yeah.
Each part of making tea, the leaves, the water, the teapot, they all represent a different part of these discourses. It's like this tiny play showing how we negotiate knowledge and desire every day.
Like a microcosm of our interactions. So if the author can do that with tea, what other everyday stuff could they look at? What about online dating? Each swipe, each message, each profile picture could represent different elements within those discourses.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's really cool. It'd be a whole new way to understand how we present ourselves online and look for connection in this digital age. Way more relatable than some of the more abstract psychoanalytic stuff.
Exactly. So first suggestion for the author,
Mm-hmm.
maybe ease up on the jargon a bit
Yeah.
and give us more everyday examples. It
Yeah.
really helps to connect with the ideas on a more concrete level.
Definitely. I agree with that. Another thing the author mentions melancholic desire, but doesn't really dig into it. What if they explored it through the lens of unfulfilled dreams?
Oh, yeah, that's good. Like a chapter dedicated to the sadness of wanting to be a musician,
Yeah.
but everyone tells you to get a real job.
Exactly, that struggle between what society expects and what you actually want. That's where melancholic desire really hits home.
It's so relatable, that feeling of longing for something that feels out of reach. And it ties in with the whole symbolic versus real authorization thing, which the author touches on.
Oh, yeah.
So symbolic authorization comes from outside laws, institutions, social norms. But real authorization comes from within, from facing your own conflicts and finding your own sense of what's right.
Like the difference between following the rules because you have to versus doing something because it feels right to you, even if it goes against the grain.
Exactly. What if the author used this to analyze a coming-of-age story? A character struggling to balance their authorized path, like becoming a doctor to please their parents, with their real desire to pursue art.
Oh, that's a classic struggle. Finding your own voice amidst all the pressure. It's a great way to bring those psychoanalytic concepts down to earth.
It would make them so much more relatable, and it would give the author a chance to show off those storytelling skills. which we definitely see glimpses of in these writings.
Okay. Absolutely. Another thing that stood out was their analysis of work. They make a distinction between symbolic engagement, which is all about meeting expectations, and real engagement, which is driven by passion.
Yeah, they even use the term knowledge at work to describe that inner drive.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
the artist who keeps creating, even if their work isn't selling, they're not just working, they're engaging with something meaningful to them.
Totally. What if the author took this idea beyond the individual and looked at it on a societal level? Think about essential workers, nurses, teachers, sanitation workers. Their work is crucial, but often undervalued. Is that a form of real engagement, even if it's not recognized or rewarded in the same way?
That's a really interesting question. It makes you think about how we value different types of work and how we measure success in the first place.
It's about finding meaning beyond just money or status.
Exactly. And it actually connects with their analysis of Frederick Jameson's Working Class Pride. Jameson imagined a utopia where everyone, regardless of ability, has a role to play. It's about valuing participation and contribution beyond just economic output.
I like that.
So, what if the author explored this through the lens of disability rights? Imagine a society where people with disabilities are fully integrated into the workforce, not for economic efficiency, but because their participation is inherently valuable.
Wow, that's powerful. It really challenges us to rethink our ideas about ability and productivity, to create a more inclusive society where everyone can contribute.
It's a vision of a truly just and equitable society. These are some amazing ideas, and this is just scratching the surface. The author also analyzes the film Ghost in the Shell through those ideas of real mourning and symbolic authorization.
Right, the cyborg protagonist has to grapple with her artificial existence and the loss of her human past. It's about self-discovery, but also about questioning the systems that define her.
In the end, she gets reintegrated into the very system that created her. It's bittersweet, and it raises some big questions about individual autonomy within these larger power structures.
What if the author took that theme and applied it to AI sentience, like an AI that becomes self-aware and struggles to find its place in a world that sees it as a tool?
I'm already hooked. That's a story that's so relevant right now with AI becoming so prominent.
Yeah, and it builds on all those ideas the author is already working with. Authorization, identity, the tension between individual will and societal expectations.
It's like we're weaving this whole new tapestry of ideas based on the threads that the author has already spun.
It's a great analogy. We're taking their concepts and pushing them further, exploring all the potential in new and exciting ways.
And who knows? Maybe our little deep dive here will spark some inspiration for the author's future work.
I hope so. Yeah, it's really exciting to think about all the different directions this could go. Another area where the author could really make a mark is with saudade, that Portuguese word for this really deep longing.
Oh yeah, saudade. It's more than just missing something. It's that ache for something that might never have been or can never be again. The author links it to melancholic desire, that yearning for the impossible.
Yeah, exactly. They say saudade is like mourning for something that was always impossible. What if they took that and applied it to the climate crisis?
Whoa, that's a really interesting angle. Like saudade for a world without pollution, for a climate that hasn't been irrevocably changed.
Right.
It's longing for a past we can't get back, but also for a future that feels increasingly uncertain.
Exactly. It taps into this collective feeling of loss and anxiety about the planet. It could be a powerful way to explore the emotional impact of climate change.
And it would definitely resonate with a lot of people.
Sure.
Speaking of resonating with people, the author gets pretty philosophical too. They analyze, I think, therefore I am.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
They build on Lacan's interpretation, which suggests this split between thinking and being. It's not just about existing, but about recognizing the unconscious, the part of ourselves we're not even fully aware of. And they connect this to the debates about sex and gender. They critique both biological essentialism and social constructivism, saying both missed the mark on how sex is this impossible category, full of conflict and ambiguity. It's not about finding a definitive answer, but about embracing the complexity.
How could the author take that further? What if they applied this critique to the current political landscape, where these debates are so polarized? Could this offer a way to move past those rigid positions?
I think so. It could lead to more nuanced and productive conversations about gender and identity.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that human experience isn't just black and white. It's a whole spectrum. The author could really contribute to these conversations.
Absolutely. They also talk about this link between curiosity and ignorance. challenging the idea that curiosity is just about seeking knowledge. They say it can actually be tied to a passion for ignorance.
Interesting. Like sometimes we'd rather not know.
Exactly.
That's kind of scary, actually.
They argue that we use knowledge as a shield sometimes, a way to avoid facing uncomfortable truths.
Makes you think.
So what if they took this idea and wrote a mystery novel? Imagine a detective who's driven to solve the case, but also terrified of what they might discover.
Ooh, that's a great premise. The pursuit of knowledge becomes dangerous. A descent into the unknown, where the truth is more unsettling than not knowing.
Exactly. It plays with those themes of knowledge and desire,
Yeah.
and the limits of what we can understand.
It'd be a psychological mystery with real depth.
And the author brings up this idea of a crisis.
Yeah.
As something more than just a bad event. It's when the things that give our world meaning start to fall apart.
Yeah, I remember that part.
They use the authority-body complex as an example. How we connect authority to physical embodiment. Like a king and his crown,
Right.
a crisis disrupts those connections. It shows how artificial those power structures really are.
So how could the author expand on that?
What if they wrote a post-apocalyptic story? The old systems have collapsed, and people are trying to build new forms of order and meaning.
That's perfect for exploring those themes, how authority works, what makes something legitimate, the human need for structure.
It's about what happens when the foundations of our world are shaken, and we have to confront how fragile everything is.
It could be a really exciting way to combine post-apocalyptic stuff with those deeper philosophical and psychological ideas.
It's definitely the author's sweet spot. And speaking of things the author's good at, they also talk about the relationship between will and desire.
Oh, yeah.
They argue that desire is deeper, more unconscious than conscious intention.
Right. It's not always something we can control.
They use the image of the object cause of desire, something we chase but can never fully grasp. Our will is always trying to rein in those desires, trying to channel them towards things we can actually achieve.
It's like this constant internal struggle.
What if the author explored this in a political thriller? A character driven by ambition for power, but also haunted by these unconscious desires. That could destroy everything they've worked for.
Oh, that's good. It's about the dark side of ambition, how our desires can both drive us and destroy us.
It's a perfect genre for exploring those psychoanalytic ideas, with all that suspense and psychological depth.
Agreed.
It's a chance to show how those unconscious desires play out on a grand stage, shaping the course of history.
And the author is great at creating those morally ambiguous characters.
Absolutely. Another area that stood out was their take on real versus symbolic monsters.
Yeah, they challenge that whole idea of monsters as inherently evil.
Right. They say what we consider monstrous often reflects our own anxieties and taboos.
Like what we're afraid of.
Exactly. They use Frankenstein's monster as an example. He's initially this horrifying creature, but his story also shows his capacity for love, longing, suffering.
He's more human than monster in a way.
Right. So what if the author took this concept and applied it to immigration? Imagine a story where immigrants are demonized, dehumanized, seen as this threat to society.
Ooh, that's powerful. It's about how fear and prejudice turn real people into symbolic monsters, leading to discrimination and injustice.
It's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah,
And the author has the sensitivity to do it justice.
I agree.
It builds on their work on authorization and identity, and how symbolic systems shape our perceptions.
Definitely.
It's about recognizing the humanity of those who are often labeled as other, challenging those systems that create harmful categories.
It's about empathy and understanding.
And speaking of understanding, the author also talks about decipherment. It's not just about decoding information, it's about uncovering hidden meanings and embracing ambiguity.
Right. It's deeper than just translation.
They contrast it with decryption, which is just about getting the original message back. Decipherment is about interpretation, being open to multiple layers of meaning.
It's more nuanced.
And they connect this to the psychoanalytic idea of the symptom as a message from the unconscious that needs to be deciphered. What if they use this to write a historical mystery?
Ooh, I like that.
A story set during a time of political turmoil, where a coded message could reveal a conspiracy or prevent a tragedy.
That's a great setting.
The protagonist has to decipher not just the words, but the hidden motives and power dynamics at play.
It's a historical mystery with a psychological twist.
Exactly. Combining intrigue with those deeper themes.
The author could really explore how language can be used to conceal and reveal, to manipulate and empower.
It's about the power of language to shape history.
Yeah.
And the author also makes this distinction between faked and fucked facts.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
It's a provocative way to look at how information gets messed with.
We all know about fake news, which is just straight up lies.
Right. But a fucked fact, as the author puts it, is something that resists being turned into knowledge.
Like it defies definition.
Exactly. They use the example of someone yelling, "We're fucked,"
Yeah.
in a crisis. It expresses despair, but it doesn't offer any real insight or actionable knowledge.
It's like trying to grasp something that's constantly shifting.
What if the author wrote a satirical novel about academia? A group of scholars arguing about a fucked fact, each trying to force their own interpretation on something that can't be categorized.
Oh, I love that. Poking fun at academia while exploring those deeper philosophical questions.
Exactly. It's a chance to use humor to talk about serious ideas.
The author has a good sense of humor, too.
They do. And speaking of serious ideas, they also dive into sacrifice, exploring how it works on a personal and societal level.
They talk about how civilization is built on repressing our instincts.
Yeah, we sacrifice immediate gratification for social order.
But that repression comes at a cost.
Right. It can manifest in all sorts of ways: neuroses, anxieties, even violence.
What if they explored this through environmentalism?
Ooh, interesting.
Imagine a future ravaged by climate change. People having to make tough choices about what to save, what to let go.
That's powerful. The ethical dilemmas of climate change. The tension between individual needs and the collective good. The sacrifices we might have to make for future generations.
It's about what it means to live a good life in a world facing these existential threats.
It's a really relevant story for our times, and it connects to their work on desire, repression, and the social contract.
Absolutely. It's about how interconnected our choices are, how individual actions can have ripple effects.
And speaking of interconnectedness, they also talk about another world is possible. But they go beyond just advocating for change. They suggest it's not just the world that needs to change, but how we see it.
Right, our perception of the world.
They say we need a good mirror to reflect back to us the true nature of reality, a way to see past the illusions.
So what if they wrote a philosophical novel about virtual reality?
Ooh, I like that.
A character enters a virtual world designed to challenge their perceptions, to expose them to new ways of seeing and being.
That's really cool. It uses VR as a metaphor for expanding our consciousness.
Exactly.
It could explore big questions about perception, reality, consciousness.
It would be a blend of philosophy and speculative fiction.
Which the author is great at. It could push the boundaries of what literature can do.
Absolutely. Another area where the author could really break new ground is in their exploration of language and authorization.
Oh yeah, they talk about how language can grant or deny legitimacy.
It shapes our ideas about authority, power, social hierarchies.
So powerful.
Language can be used to exclude and silence, but also to empower and challenge, to create new stories.
What if they wrote a historical fantasy novel about a society where language is magic?
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Imagine a world where words can shape reality, to heal or harm, to create or destroy.
Wow, that's a high-stakes world.
The author could explore how language is used to control people, to enforce social norms, to restrict access to knowledge.
It's a really imaginative way to play with those themes of authorization and power.
It's a world that's both familiar and strange.
Exactly.
Blending fantasy with those deeper philosophical and linguistic ideas, the author could create something truly unique.
Speaking of unique ideas, the author also introduces the postmodern alienation model, building on Lacan's idea that alienation in late capitalism goes beyond our separation from labor.
It's not just about the products we make, it's deeper than that.
Right, they argue that we're alienated from ourselves, from each other, from any sense of real meaning. It's all about the capitalist discourse that pushes endless consumption.
We become cogs in the machine.
What if the author explored this in a dystopian story, set in a hyper-capitalist future?
Ooh, I can see it now.
Everything's branded, monetized, optimized for profit. Characters struggling to find their identity in a system that sees them as consumers.
A chilling vision of the future.
It could explore how late capitalism dehumanizes us, erodes our sense of self and community.
And the author's great at world building. They could create a future that's both believable and terrifying.
A world that reflects our anxieties about the present.
Speaking of anxieties, the author also delves into the Oedipal switch. It's their interpretation of a crucial stage in psychological development.
Right, when a child realizes language has its own rules. It's a shift from an egocentric view to recognizing a larger social reality.
What if the author used this to explore AI development? An AI initially driven by simple desires, but then it starts to understand language and its power.
Wow, That's really interesting.
It could explore those big questions about consciousness, language, reality itself.
That's a fresh take on those psychoanalytic concepts.
It's about the potential for AI to evolve beyond its programming, to develop its own agency and identity.
It could be a groundbreaking sci-fi story.
And speaking of groundbreaking, the author also dives into the phallic signifier, which represents power and authority in a patriarchal society. They say it can be both oppressive and liberating.
It's complex depending on how we relate to it.
What if they wrote a historical fiction novel about a woman who challenged the system? Think about a queen who ruled in her own right, or a female warrior who defied gender roles, or a woman who made groundbreaking contributions to science or art.
I love that idea. It's a chance to explore the complexities of female power.
How women have navigated and subverted patriarchal systems throughout history.
It would bring those psychoanalytic concepts to life, showing how they play out in real historical contexts.
It's a story that could be both empowering and inspiring.
Absolutely.
It's about reclaiming those forgotten stories, celebrating the resilience and ingenuity of women throughout history.
And it's a perfect example of how the author can take these complex ideas and use them to shed light on the human experience.
Yeah, it's amazing how much there is to unpack here. There's so much potential in these writings. For example, the author really digs into this idea of engaged labor power, distinguishing between symbolic engagement driven by external rewards
Yeah.
and real engagement, which is fueled by internal passion.
Right. It's about that inner drive that pushes us to create, to contribute, to engage with something beyond just earning a paycheck.
Yeah, exactly.
And they connect this to jouissance, that intense, almost excessive enjoyment that Lacan talks about. What if the author explored this through the lens of activism? Think about people who dedicate their lives to social justice, environmental causes.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Their work is often really difficult, with little reward, but they keep going because they're driven by something deeper.
Right.
A belief in a cause, a vision of a better world.
It's a perfect example of real engagement and jouissance in action. Exactly. It's not about the external rewards, which are often scarce. It's about that internal fire that fuels their commitment.
It's about passion and dedication.
It's about what makes the struggle worthwhile.
That's a really powerful way to look at activism, and it could help us understand how change happens.
And speaking of change, the author critiques the phallogocentric myth of logic. It's the idea that traditional Western philosophy has favored masculine ways of thinking, creating this false dichotomy between masculine logic as rational and objective, and feminine logic, which gets dismissed as emotional or intuitive.
It's like one is seen as superior to the other.
Exactly.
So how could the author expand on this?
What if they applied this critique to education? Specifically, how we teach science and math.
Interesting.
Imagine a curriculum that embraced multiple ways of knowing and problem solving, valuing intuition and creativity alongside logic and analysis.
That would be a huge shift.
It could totally change how we educate future generations, encourage them to think more holistically, and approach problems from different angles.
It could lead to some amazing breakthroughs.
Right. After all, some of the biggest scientific advances came from intuition and imagination.
It's not always a straight line from A to B.
And this ties into the author's idea of the postmodern subject, this feeling of fragmented identity, a lack of stable grounding.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with information and stimuli.
They say it's due to the decline of traditional sources of authority, like religion, family, the nation-state, and the rise of technology, which creates this sense of disconnection.
So how could they explore that further?
What if they wrote a coming-of-age story set in the digital age? A character overwhelmed by conflicting messages and identities online, struggling to figure out who they are in this fragmented and chaotic world.
Oh, that's a story that would resonate with a lot of young people.
It's so relevant to their experience.
It's a chance to explore the challenges of identity in the digital age, and maybe offer some guidance on navigating that complexity.
And it would let the authors show off their understanding of youth culture.
Absolutely.
It's a story that needs to be told.
And the author has the insight and sensitivity to do it well.
The author also talks about the link between embodiment and authorization. They say a crisis can disrupt the connection between authority and the body, exposing how artificial those social hierarchies really are.
It's like the emperor has no clothes.
Exactly. They use the example of a king losing his crown. It's not the crown itself that gives him authority, but the whole system of beliefs that surround it.
Right, it's about symbols and perception.
So how could the author take that further? What if they wrote a body swap story? Imagine two characters from completely different backgrounds, say a wealthy CEO and a homeless person. They suddenly find themselves in each other's bodies.
Whoa, that's a great premise.
It's a classic trope, but with a deeper layer.
It could explore how our social positions shape our experiences.
It's about challenging our assumptions about privilege and prejudice, how we judge people based on appearance.
It would be a powerful story about empathy and understanding.
And the author is great at creating those kinds of stories.
They have a real knack for it.
And speaking of things the author is good at, they also challenge the idea of truth as objective and absolute.
Well, yeah, they say truth is always partial, shaped by our desires and perspectives.
Exactly. They draw on Lacan's idea that truth is mediated through language and the unconscious. We can never fully grasp it because we're always looking through our own lens.
So how could they explore that further?
What if they wrote a courtroom drama where the truth is elusive with multiple perspectives clashing, and the characters have to confront their own biases as they seek justice?
Ooh, that's a great setting for that kind of exploration.
It's a classic genre, but with this added layer of complexity.
The author could weave a web of intrigue as the characters piece together different versions of the truth,
It's about how truth can be slippery and elusive.
and how our own desires and perceptions can cloud our judgment.
It would be a gripping read for sure. Well, I think we've given the author a lot to think about. We've explored some really interesting ideas today, from feminine logic and unauthorized bodies to Sodad and the crisis of authorization. We've looked at how these concepts could be applied to everything, from coming-of-age stories and political thrillers to dystopian novels and even romantic comedies.
We've really pushed the boundaries of what's possible.
And hopefully we've sparked some inspiration for the author. Who knows what incredible new works might emerge from our little deep dive.
I can't wait to see what they come up with.
Me too. So to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas. Think about how they might apply to your own lives. What unauthorized bodies do you see in your world? Where do you experience Sadat? How do you navigate the complexities of truth and meaning? Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deeper. That's what makes life interesting.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.